Well, welcome everyone. Wow, this is working well tonight. Welcome to It's a Brain Thing, and you guys, kudos to you guys for coming in. It's a beautiful day outside, and coming in and listening to this guy drone on about the brain. You know, I can think of other things you might be wanting to do, but tonight we're going to talk about personality, and as I titled it, personality and its disorders. And many of you are probably thinking, now, how can a personality be disordered? Right? We all have one. How can it be disordered? Maybe some of you know already, but we'll go into that a little bit. And one thing I want to say, a couple things I want to say before we even get started. First of all is, you know that the reason, you've heard me say many times, the reason I do these talks is because I'm trying to get folks to understand the brain and how it works so that we all understand ourselves a little better, but also so we're a little bit more understanding of the guy or gal next to us. And there's a little bit less stigma, a little bit more tolerance in our society for people who may act a certain way or behave differently or these kind of things. Personality and probably in substance abuse, those two are still probably the two most, of all psychiatric diagnoses and psychiatric illnesses, those are the two most stigmatized things. And I think, you know, we've talked before about when you don't understand something, that's when you tend to stigmatize something. You put it down or you stigmatize it. And I think personality and substance abuse both are things that folks have a hard time understanding. And I don't know that we always kind of, you know, logically think about these things as coming from the brain. You know, we think of them, substance abuse as a weakness or something. You know, it's a character flaw, right? Personality may be the same thing. I don't know if any of us really think about it much. We all have one, but probably for our own personalities, we don't think much about it. It's something we take for granted, and can't really step outside yourself and look at yourself objectively. But I bet you if you ask your spouse or somebody close to you, they know what your personality is, right? And they can bring it up and find flaws in it all the time, right? So personality is definitely comes from the brain, and again, it's because it's so stigmatized. I think it's good that we talk about it and we kind of explain where it comes from, or at least what we think at this point where it comes from, and why, how can it be disordered, which seems kind of odd. First of all, does anybody have, like, if I were to say what is a personality, does anybody have on top of their head, can anybody come up with a guess or just like a couple words to describe it? You guys are sitting all in the back there, so I won't pick on them. But anybody, just shout it out if somebody knows anything.
How you act.
How you act, right?
How you respond to different situations.
Okay, how you respond to different situations, yeah. I guess it's kind of what makes us us, right? It's what makes me different than you, and all the folks in the room. So it is somewhat in charge of how you act. It's not the only thing, of course, and it's also not the only thing that makes you, of course. We've talked about all these other things that can affect that a little bit, depression, anxiety, and such. But personality is sort of core who we are. Like if you're not depressed, if you're not anxious, if you have no other, if it's just you existing the way you are, that's your personality. There are some sort of formal definitions, and it kind of comes to your point as to the definitions of personality. Some of these are I just got them out of a dictionary where you guys can find them too. And they sound kind of technical, but if you read between the lines a little bit, they're basically what you said. The first one is a complex of characteristics that distinguishes an individual, especially in relationships with others. What you're going to hear tonight a lot about personality is it definitely affects your relationships, right? How you interact with other people, because that personality is what other people see, and that's how they know you as who you are. And then another one is a pattern of collective, this one's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of technical, but pattern of collective character, behavioral, temperamental, emotional, and mental traits of a person. So that's kind of broad. And then finally, the total qualities and traits as a character or behavior that are peculiar to a specific person. But by peculiar, I don't think it means abnormal. I just think it means it's unique to that person. So our personalities, they determine how we cope with stress, how we interpret and interact with other people. Like when somebody says something to us, how do we interpret that? As you'll see, as I start to describe some of these disorders, some folks have a really hard time interpreting what other people say, and it causes some trouble in their relationships. And as I mentioned, we see it in other people. We see their personalities pretty clearly, but it's not so easy to see our own personalities unless somebody's really honest with you, brutally honest with you, and says, "Dang, Dave, you're awful obsessive." or something like that, not to share too much personal information. Where does personality come from? I don't know if you guys have ever thought about this, and I think I talked about this very early on when I started doing these talks, but we think that infants are born with a certain temperament, okay? And it's not really, temperament's not the same as personality. Temperament would be described, and we think there are sort of just a couple of different types of main types of temperament. And then what happens is those main types of temperament are either made worse or better or somehow shaped by the environment, by what you go through growing up and such, okay? So let me give you an example. Let's say you have, and you guys are teachers and parents, you guys all know this, some kids are sort of shy or inhibited, right? So these are kids who socially, they're kind of wallflowers. They would rather not interact socially if they didn't have to. And when they do, they're kind of quiet and they're timid and they don't make eye contact and this kind of thing. So these are sort of shy and timid temperaments, okay? Now, if that child is really not ever challenged to get out of, to be around people and forced to, talk in front of people and this kind of thing, that child may grow up to be very avoidant or that's one of the types of personality disorders it could be, or socially phobic, which is the same probably as avoidant personality disorder. So these kids may grow up to continue to be very shy and inhibited. On the other hand, if they're not pushed too hard, but pushed just enough, that to be social and to be around other people and such, and to interact with them, then that maybe the personality doesn't turn out to be disordered, and it's just maybe they're still a little bit shy, but they're able to interact and all that. So that's one example. Another example of a temperament would be somebody who's impulsive or aggressive. Anybody know any kids like that? Anybody ever met any kids like that? You know any adults like that? Anybody? We'll talk about what this means in a minute. Impulsive, aggressive, you know what aggressive means, but impulsive is folks who just act without thinking about the consequences. Okay, so if it feels good now, I'm going to do it. Don't really think about, oh gosh, I might lose my kids, I might lose, I might get put in jail or whatever else. They don't think about the consequences, they just act. So again, we think that kids are sort of like that, they're born like that, and then depending on their environment, that can either be shaped in a more positive way so that doesn't interfere with their functions much growing up, or it can interfere, their environment. Let's give you an example. Maybe it's somebody who's got this impulsive, aggressive temperament, and they're born into a home where, maybe mom's not around for some reason. She's depressed or she's working all the time. She's just not around emotionally, and the child doesn't bond with anybody. Okay, that can be problematic. You've heard of the study with monkeys where they did that and took a little monkey and wouldn't let it bond with its mother, and then they put them up as an adult. I mean, it takes a while. It takes less time for them to become an adult than it does for us. So they put these monkeys then as adult monkeys into the social population of the rest of the monkeys who had normal upbringings with their mothers, and they wouldn't interact very well with the others. They would be aggressive, and they would hurt the other monkeys. They would steal from them, all that kind of stuff. So I mean, we're not monkeys, of course, but you can deduce a little bit, or the theory is that perhaps this ends up with humans having antisocial personality disorder, which we're going to talk about tonight. And this is sort of like what I just described with the monkeys. They don't really care about anybody else or consequences to anyone else or things like that. They pretty much think of just themselves and that kind of thing. So those are kind of examples of how somebody might end up with a personality disorder. Okay, but it doesn't have to be a disorder. Obviously, you can also just have traits of something, right? So antisocial traits, or you could have histrionic traits, or different things that we're going to talk about tonight. Again, what is it that I always say? How do we know it's a disorder versus just your personality? It's anything in psychiatry. How do we say it's a disorder? Anybody know?
If it interferes with your daily.
Absolutely. If it interferes with your function. Hey, somebody's been listening here. It's good. Yeah, if it interferes with your function, right? So who cares what somebody's personality is like? It's not a big deal unless it interferes with their function, right? If they can't hold a job, if they can't have a relationship, then then it can be a problem. That's kind of tough.